Okay, our next panel is going to be focused actually on graphite and a little bit of nickel. Matt, you have been on Rockstock Channel. We talked about, I think, graphite's dirty little secret, artificial, synthetic being dirty and natural being clean. In Battery Day in 2020, nickel stocks rose on Mine More Nickel, graphite stocks rose. But in the last year or so, the shine has been off nickel and graphite and really has only been on lithium. But you think graphite's poised to follow lithium. Why? Help us in a short period of time. It's a very nuanced industry. Like, when's the graphite price going to start moving? And when are these graphite stocks going to be exciting again? On our scoreboard, all but one are natural graphite stories. And the one, Novonix is the synthetic one that had a gigantic run, but has since come in like 70 or 80%, but still has a very high valuation. But talk about natural graphite specifically.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think people don't understand, because graphite's not a globally quoted price, is that Chinese graphite prices have already been running for probably the last 6 months or so, with a possible a small sort of out in December, January. But flake graphite price has been very strong in China over the last 6 months or so, and even spherical prices have been pretty robust as well. So we have a situation in graphite where it's very much a two-level industry. If we push artificial/synthetic graphite to the side and we focus on the natural flake, and the reason that we focus on the natural flake is that it's going to be a real struggle for the artificial graphite industry to really catch up with demand. And whereas batteries over the last sort of 5-10 years have featured an awful lot of artificial/synthetic graphite, going forward we will need a higher proportion of natural flake graphite, naturally derived graphite, because the artificial graphite sector, with its quite power intensive profile and it's not particularly environmentally friendly factors, is going to struggle to maintain supply growth. So we rely on natural graphite to keep that up. And if we look at the industry, what we've got really is two tiers. So in the first tier, you're mining the natural graphite out of the ground and concentrating it to a 94-95% concentrate grade. And then in the second tier, you're purifying that, micronizing it, and then forming it into spheres to be used for battery grade, so anode grade material. And it's really the second tier where we see, if you'll excuse the horrific pun, the big black hole emerging. We're just not seeing enough projects coming on outside China. On our radar screen at the moment, I think we did a big study beginning of last year. I think we had 12 or 13 projects. 2 more have been added since then. We need all of those to come into production on time and on budget if we're going to fill the gap. And experience in the industry over the last 5 or 6 years has suggested that probably only 30 to 40% of those will come in on time. So we really are looking at a very major risk that we won't fill that gap, and as a result, graphite prices will rise. And the graphite industry is quite complex in terms of getting to that battery grade spherical graphite. And it's more a sort of chemicals industry than a mining industry. And it certainly has been an issue in the Western world to actually, get projects to that level, to get to the specifications where the projects are actually producing to specification on a consistent basis. And that's what we need to happen. And we need it to happen kind of yesterday if we're going to fill in that gap. So that's really the issue with the graphite space.
When do you see that shortage emerging?
It depends how fast the growth goes, how much material can come out in China, but it could start to emerge over the next 12 to 18 months. We already seen the growth in graphite materials, anode materials demand out of China, and we're just not seeing enough midstream capacity going on. there's a couple of projects. There's one in Sweden, there's one in the US, which are at, advanced piloting stage, but they're still a couple of years away from commercial production. And then there's a number of players that have pilot plants under development in production. But again, you're a couple of years away from commercial production. And if the industry continues to expand as rapidly as we're expecting it to, then those gaps are going to start emerging quite fast.
I'd like to ask, we had Jigger Shah on the program, and they just loaned money for the processing of Syra, has a Mozambique flake graphite mine, and then in Louisiana, they're doing the processing. So they've been producing from Mozambique for a period of time, and Jigger Shah indicated that Mozambique mine can grow quite rapidly. And I think if I remember correctly, he said a very large percentage, like a 25% of US demand for national graphite can be just from that one mine. So I remember looking at Syra, I don't know, 5 or 8 years ago, and there was always this, that scared the whole market, the flake graphite market. So a question on that, but also a question when I think about flake graphite kind of being like spodumene, right? Can you sell, I think Syra is selling to China for now, before it's going to be redirected here. So is there scope for just flake graphite mines without going downstream into either spherical or coated spherical?
Okay. So second question first. Yes, there is. And, up till sort of 2 or 3 years ago, anode material or flake graphite for anode material was a very small percentage of the graphite industry. There are many other major applications of graphite that are key industrial applications in the world. So yes, there is demand for that, but obviously as we ratchet up upstream supply for the anode industry, we do run the risk that we start to overload those industries or those applications. The way that we look at flake graphite is we divide it up into baskets, size baskets. So really in the past, the focus of graphite mines has been on very large basket sizes, jumbo and super jumbo. And these have very, very specific applications in industry. Now, the focus for the anode materials industry is really on the small to medium flake size. So that's the sort of projects that we're trying to maximize here. And as we bring those projects on, they will be producing material in the jumbo and super jumbo and other flake sizes. So there is the risk that as you ratchet up production, you're overloading the other applications of graphite. So, I've said, and I've said on many occasions, we don't have a shortage of upstream graphite assets in the world. There is a fair amount of upstream graphite assets. The shortage is really in the midstream space, insofar as you're transitioning out of being a mining asset into being a chemicals asset, that you've got to produce this stuff to spec on a consistent basis. And it's complex. It's very, very complex. And that's really where we're coming up short. And the Syra downstream asset in the US was one of the 2 assets I cited as being in the advanced sort of piloting stage, almost in the demonstration plant stage at the moment. And there's one other asset in Sweden which is quite an advanced stage, but apart from that, everybody else is kind of at the pilot plant stage, and you're probably talking maybe 2, maybe 3 years away from commercial production. And as we found in the lithium space, starting up the asset isn't enough. You have to get to a point where you're producing to spec over consistent basis, and that's the issue that takes time. So that's what makes it complex. It's not enough to be producing spherical graphite. You've got to be producing spherical graphite to the right spec and with the right physical and chemical properties.
Okay, well, this is Canada Rocks. So we do have one company, two projects, Nouveau Monde, which Matt, you have graciously agreed to interview because your knowledge of graphite is top notch. And I remember 2 years ago, I read a note that you had written, which was kind of like Graphite 101. It was like a 50-page note. I think that's on your website also for free. And if anyone is watching this that wants to dig deeper into graphite, I encourage you to look for that publication. Before we move on, just, nickel, what any thoughts, how high can the nickel price go was a program we did last year, but I want to talk more on the, there's dirty graphite, and then there's clean graphite, but there's also dirty nickel, and clean nickel. So if you could just talk about that aspect of the nickel market, and we'll conclude on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting. I mean, when you look at the graphite industry, one of the attractions of the Quebec assets, the natural flake assets, is from an ESG point of view that if you use thermal purification, it can be driven by hydroelectric power. So that's an awful lot cleaner, is awful less carbonate or awful lot less carbon intensity. And for instance, if you use thermal purification in China, where the grid is 70 to 80% powered by hydrocarbons. And I think it's very similar to the sort of situation that we see in nickel. I mean, one of the problems that we're seeing in nickel at the moment from an ESG point of view is that a lot of the growth in nickel supply is going to come out of Indonesia. It's laterite nickel. It's going to be made into nickel pig iron by smelting a very intensive pyrometallurgical process, which uses a lot of power. And the Indonesian grid is primarily coal as well. And then there's another process which again uses a lot of power to take it up to cool intermediate products. And from our point of view, one of the attractions of the North American nickel space, where you get these sulfide ore bodies which are much cleaner to process and don't use a double pyromet process. So there's lots of opportunities in the North American nickel sulfide space to produce using a much cleaner processing, similar to what we see in the graphite space. So I think the ESG opportunities of producing nickel in North America are certainly an improvement on the laterite double pyromet process that's a lot of OEMs have signed up to in Indonesia and China at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matt, and look forward to having you interview some of our companies later in this conference.
Thanks a lot.